I'm Colin Walls, and I'm here once again to talk about embedded software. Today I want to consider an issue in C++. Not a particularly complex issue, but something which seems to cause confusion, where the clear answer is not known by as many people as one might expect, but actually turns out to be really simple. I want to talk about structures and classes in C++ and how they compare. Let's start off by thinking about structures. Think about structures in C. Well, here's an example. In my example here, I have a simple structure called myStruct. It has three member variables, three elements inside it, A, B, and C, each of which is a different type. I can declare an instance of this structure by saying struct myStruct, and here I've called it myVar. And I can access the elements inside using the dot operator. And I've assigned the value 99 to the int element B. That's all straightforward. Every C programmer knows about structs. The great news is that in C++ this code would be identical. We can make some changes to it, but you could use it exactly like this. So let's move on to something more C++-like. We'll talk about a class. Now here is a simple example of a class, somewhat similar to the structs we just dealt with. It has a couple of member variables, A and B, and it has some other components as well. It has a function in there called fun. You can't put functions in structures in C, but you can put them in classes in C++. Incidentally, you can have pointers to functions in C structures, but not actual functions. So here in this class we have this function fun, and if you look at the bottom you can see I've created an instance of this class, myObj. We don't need to put the word class at the beginning there. You just my class becomes effectively a new data type, and we can access that function fun using the dot operator in a similar way to that we access structure elements. Now what's different about a class, well, apart from the fact we can include functions, is the different parts of the class may be private or public. In fact, they're private by default. So the A and B member variables here are not accessible to the outside world. They're accessible to the function fun, but not to anything outside of the class. Incidentally, I've included a couple of other functions inside this class here called myClass and tilde_myClass. These are the constructor and destructor. Another difference with classes is you can have a constructor and destructor which are run respectively when an object is created and when it goes out of scope. So myClass would set things up and tilde_myClass would shut them down, whatever that means. So that's a class. It looks a bit different to a structure, as you can see, syntactically similar, but a bit different in terms of its capabilities. So we've talked about structs in C, and I've said that a C struct will work in C++. What else can we do with structures in C++? Well, we can have one like this. That looks mysteriously like the class that I just showed you. The only difference is I've actually moved the member variables down to the bottom and labelled them as private, and I've put the functions at the top and not labelled them at all. This is because in a struct the initial elements are public, and therefore we can call the function fun, but we can have private elements like A and B which we cannot access from outside, just like the class. And we can create an example, an instance of this by saying myStruct, myObj at the bottom there. We don't need the word struct in C++ because the structure behaves like a class. You know what? Structs and classes are exactly the same thing in C++, but for one tiny detail. When you start writing down the elements of a class or the elements of a struct in C++, the first elements are private in the case of a class and they're public in the case of a struct. End of differences. You can put private or public labels anywhere you like and group various things as being publicly available or private. That's the only difference between the two. What I would recommend in terms of utilization is you don't really exploit this knowledge too much because it will confuse readers of your code, because not everybody has actually had this explanation very clearly. So the safest way to write your code in terms of writing it maintainably and readably is to use a struct in C++ in much the same way as you would in C. So if you want a simple data structure without any functions built in, without any clever stuff, just use a struct, that's fine. But as soon as you want to add functions to it, you want a constructor, you want private components to it, use a class. The reader will thank you because they know what they're doing. So that's it for today. I will be back in due course with some other embedded software subjects, maybe some more C++. See how I feel in due course. But until I see you again, bye for now.